Issues. Lawmakers in Congress approved new legislation cracking down on corporate fraud. Are the new measures tough enough? What will it take to restore investor confidence in South Florida? A proposed constitutional amendment would trigger a review of sales tax exemptions in Florida, and business groups are fighting to keep the proposal off the November ballot. Political and business leaders gather in Miami Beach to look at the role of Hispanics in America. Lawmakers in Washington responded to public outrage over corporate crime this week. The House and Senate passed measures imposing stiff penalties for crooked executives. The Senate also voted to create an oversight board to discipline the accounting industry. But investors remain skeptical. Joining us to discuss this is attorney Bob Boehm. He practices corporate and securities law at the firm Ackerman Centerfit in Miami. He is a former enforcement attorney with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Laurie Holtz is a certified public accountant in Miami. He specializes in financial fraud cases at the accounting firm of Racklin, Cohen and Holtz. And Gail DeGeorge is business editor at the South Florida Sun-Sentinel. Thank you all for joining us today on Issues. Bob Boehm, let me start with you. Are the measures passed in the House and Senate sufficient in order to deter corporate crime?
I think they will go toward making people look harder at the financial statements that are included with the documents they file with the Securities and Exchange Commission. But I think the culture has to change in that executives must say the company comes first, the shareholders come first. But hopefully these stiffer penalties and more focus on the chief executive.
So in other words, you're saying that the shareholder hasn't come first in a long time.
High compensation payments reflect the fact that a lot of CEOs have been primarily concerned with their own welfare.
Laurie Holtz, would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Whether it's the options or whether it's the fact that they want the company to have a very, very successful track record, and they need to do something to make that track record, they're willing to do almost anything, because we're talking about lots and lots of money. We're not talking about the old-fashioned, I make a good living. We're talking about megabucks.
But are we also talking about lots and lots of companies? How broad is this?
Well, if you look at the last year, there seems to be a weekly company of the week. And we had in the last 30 years, we have an acceleration where for the last 30 years, it goes up on a straight curve on the way up, and it accelerated with the savings and loan crisis, and then after that, it just kept on going.
Gail DeGeorge?
I think it's investor confidence at an all-time low. I mean, people are very shocked by what they're reading. They shouldn't be, because things have happened before this. Sunbeam, Sendent, there have been scandals before this. I think it's the sheer magnitude of what they're seeing and the types of companies that are coming under
And to
scrutiny.
some degree, too, aren't we spoiled by the 90s? I mean, the profit returns from the 90s were unheard of, and probably because they weren't real. Bob?
Well, the profit returns and the successful IPOs have done two things. A, it's forced people to, or it's caused people to put a lot of money in more speculative equity situations, and also it's affected the SEC as more and more of their staff left to join private practice because there's a great need for experienced securities attorneys.
You mentioned the SEC, and you were an attorney there. Let me ask you something. You know, there's been a lot of people are saying that the head of the SEC, Harvey Pitt, should be removed from his position. Would that solve the problem? Was he negligent?
I don't think he was. Harvey's a very, very intelligent, smart, experienced guy. He's faced with the situation that the cases that are coming up now are very hard to bring, unlike insider trading cases, which you can get to quickly. These financial fraud cases need time to develop, and he came in with a very small staff compared to prior administrations.
Well, Laurie Holtz, white-collar crime is really difficult to prove. Is this going to be something where we're going to see heads roll, or are we going to have a lot of investigations and maybe
Well, there already are a lot of investigations. I mean, in the last year, there were 500 securities cases brought. That's twice as much as had been brought in the prior years. The civil cases probably have more impact than the criminal cases, because you can prove a civil case easier than you can prove a criminal case.
Well, what about, you're a CPA. What about what about a committee to oversee auditing practices?
Well, until such a time as they're functioning, the important thing is that they're creating a spotlight on the subject. And the subject has to be something that just doesn't go away. Too quickly we forget. We forget bad things and we repeat the mistakes. So I don't care what they do as long as they do something that keeps the attention on the subject.
Gail, what about the issue of conflict of interests? People who serve on boards, for example, as members of the board, who also have consulting jobs with the same company. Are we going to see a change in this type of culture?
Hopefully, yes. And I think the pension funds, the mutual fund companies, they play a role. They're big institutional shareholders, and they play a role, too, in bringing some pressure to bear on corporate governance regulation and corporate governance oversight. Absolutely.
What about the issue of Florida, South Florida in particular? A lot of retirees, a lot of people who had invested in the market, were thinking of sending their kids to college, and now are finding that their money is absolutely gone. What kind of an impact do you think, Gail, we're going to see in South Florida?
It's very painful. A lot of our residents live to some degree on investment income. They should have, however, follow those basic rules, which is know your financial goals, have a diversified portfolio, read, understand what you're investing in.
Bob?
I think that that's important. I think the people in South Florida will be affected positively when the country will be affected positively when companies do things like Coca-Cola, take steps to take certain accounting steps. They don't have to, but to show their integrity.
In the long run, but in the short run, there's going to be a huge earnings hit when those options are expensed. Among some companies.
People are angry, they're frustrated, they don't know exactly what to do, and they don't trust what they see, because whether it's the accountants, whether it's the analysts, whether it's the directors, who have all lost their way, or whether it's the company itself, people are frustrated, and it's going to take a long time without a constant scandal before they will have the comfort of believing that they can invest based on what's in front of them.
Well, how do companies restore investor confidence?
The companies have to change their culture, and whether it's through civil lawsuits, whether it's through time, or whether it's because they just want to do the right thing, they have to start doing the right thing for a long time.
You mentioned lawsuits. What about the issue? You can't sue for corporate malfeasance, correct?
That's a state law, not a securities law issue. You can sue when directors don't protect the interest of the shareholders.
Gail,
companies, you talked about restoring confidence, though. Companies can communicate, they can simplify financial statements, they can make things easier. The plain English rule the SEC was supposed to bring in. I mean, reading through these financial documents is no easy task, and I've done it for many years. So again, those types of efforts to make things easier to understand, yes, it's very complicated, but there are things that can be done.
Is there something the government should be doing that it's not doing, Bob?
I think that what the government can do is to let the folks out there know that they're very quickly trying to understand what the financial statements of large companies look like and what the questions are they need to ask. And they've actually started to do that by examining annual reports in an unprecedented fashion.
Laurie?
Well, I think that the government has to show that they're interested and not let this thing get behind them like happened in the past.
But there are a lot of people who are really concerned, Gail, that there are ex-corporate heads who are sitting in government in very powerful positions today. This is going to have a backlash possibly on government itself.
That is true. But again, if there's any good that comes out of this, it'll be that investors will pay attention, that this will not be one of those things where the penalties are swept under the rug and nothing happens.
What about shareholder responsibility and the issue of buyer beware? Does this play into this at all, Bob?
Historically, when you're dealing with public companies, the concept of buyer beware wasn't there. You relied on the analysts, the board of directors to protect you, and the regulators to look over it. It hasn't worked.
Yeah, but when you're talking about buyer beware, you should be talking about if you buy something, you get what you buy.
Right.
And what's happening now is...
But there have never been any guarantees in the market.
We're not talking about the performance of the company, we're talking about the truth of the information.
Exactly. The veracity, the faith in those financial statements, that's got to be a fundamental.
And Laurie, finally, we only have half a minute left. The impact then on South Florida for those who are retirees and Florida in general, because we only have a sales tax, and I don't say only, it's a sizable sales tax. Is this going to have a greater impact as far as what we could look at for Florida's budget?
Sure. I mean, you will see an impact absolutely on Florida's budget and on our retailers.
Not to mention, Laurie, you were talking earlier before about Florida's pension is tied to some of these. Three states lost $1 billion on WorldCom. California, in government pensions, California, New York, and Florida. Bob, I'll give you the last word.
On the Florida issue?
On the Florida issue.
People here depend on retirement assets. They will be hit hard.
Thank you so much. Attorney Bob Bowen, Miami CPA Laurie Holtz, and Gail DeGeorge of the Sun Sentinel. Up next, should Florida's tax system be overhauled? Stay with us.